They thought it would be a controlled conversation, carefully framed, tightly edited, another polished chapter in Prince Harry's media campaign. Instead, the BBC control room watched in stunned silence as one of Britain's toughest interviewers slowly stripped away the safety net. By the time the studio lights dimmed, the heir who walked away from the palace would be walking out of the studio as well, escorted off a program that had just decided it had had enough. The Newsnight studio didn't look like a battlefield, but it felt like one. Soft golden lamps framed the room, their light catching on the gilt edges of two red velvet chairs facing each other. Between them, a small round table held a glass bottle of water and two tall, untouched glasses. Behind it all hung a vast oil painting of a darkened London skyline, as if the city itself were watching. On the left chair sat Emily Maitlis, poised, shoulders straight, legs neatly crossed. A notepad rested on her lap, a pen clipped across the corner. She looked calm, almost conversational, but the line of her jaw told a different story. This was not a chat show. This was Newsnight. Opposite her, Prince Harry shifted in his seat, expensively tailored suit stretching across his shoulders. His ginger beard was neat, his hair a little thinner than the tabloids like to mock, and his expression already carried a hint of irritation, as if he'd come prepared to be misunderstood. "Good evening," Emily began, her voice low, controlled. "Tonight, a rare, extended interview with the Duke of Sussex, a man who says he stepped away from the institution that defined his life, but whose story still dominates our headlines." She turned her gaze fully onto him. "Prince Harry, thank you for joining us." Harry offered a tight smile. "Well, I'm very generous with my time, Emily, especially when it comes to correcting the record." There was a subtle shift in the control room, heads leaning closer to monitors, a producer scribbling a note. First line, first edge. Emily didn't flinch. "Let's talk about that record," she said. "You've given us documentaries, a memoir, multiple interviews. You've said you're finally telling your truth, yet every time you speak, there seems to be a fresh version of events. Do you understand why some people feel fatigued?" Harry's jaw flexed. "Fatigued?" he repeated, letting out a short laugh. "People were happy enough to read lies about me for 25 years. I'd say a few hours of hearing the truth is the least they can tolerate." "But why?" Emily pressed gently. "Does the truth need constant revisiting? You've said you wanted privacy. You've accused the British press of intrusion. Yet here you are again, in front of cameras, talking about the very thing you say traumatized you." Harry shifted, leaning back slightly, hands clasped in his lap with forced patience. "Privacy," he said, "is about choice. I choose when and how to speak. That's different from being hunted, which is what happened to me, to my wife, to my mother." Emily nodded. "You've mentioned your mother, Princess Diana, frequently," she said. "You've compared Meghan's experiences to hers. Some critics say you're weaponizing your trauma, using it as a shield against criticism. What do you say to that?" His eyes hardened. "I'd say those critics are part of the problem," he snapped. "Of course they're uncomfortable when I talk about it, because it exposes the system they work for. And I," Emily replied evenly, "am one of those people who work in the media. So, let me be very clear. Do you believe I am personally complicit?" Harry gave her a small, almost dismissive smile. "You're part of the machine, Emily, whether you like it or not." The silence after that line was heavy. In the gallery, someone muttered, "There it is." Emily took a slow breath. "I ask because," she continued, "you've spoken about empathy, kindness, mental health, yet the language you're using about journalists is very sweeping. You understand that, don't you?" "I understand that I'm done playing nice," he said. "For years we tried the polite route. We said nothing. We absorbed it. It cost us more than you can imagine. You don't get to lecture me on tone." There it was again, that defensive spike, that rehearsed anger. Emily watched him for a beat, then glanced down at her notes. "Let's move to something concrete," she said. "Security. You've taken legal action over the removal of police protection when you're in the UK. At the same time, you've criticized this country and its institutions very publicly. Do you see any tension in asking the British taxpayer to fund security for someone who has deliberately stepped away from royal duties?" Harry's lips curled in a humorless smile. I risked my life for this country in Afghanistan, he said sharply. I flew missions you can't talk about on television. The idea that my family's safety is now a budget line to be debated is frankly insulting. No one, Emily replied, is questioning your military service. What I'm asking is whether you recognize the optics. You've moved to California, you've signed multi-million-dollar media deals, and yet you want special protection when you return. Ordinary veterans might say they don't get that option. They're not being hunted by international paparazzi, Harry shot back. They're not linked to one of the most famous families on the planet. Comparing us is disingenuous, Emily, and you know it. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in focus. All right, she said, let's talk about that family. The words seemed to change the air between them. You've accused unnamed members of the royal family of serious failings, she went on. You've described conversations, private tensions, deeply personal moments. At any point did you stop and think, I'm doing to them, in my book and programs, what I say the press did to me? Harry snorted softly. No, because there's a difference between exploitation and accountability. Explain that difference, Emily said quickly. Exploitation, he replied, leaning forward now, is taking pieces of someone's life without consent, twisting them, selling them. Accountability is telling the truth about people who abuse the system they were born into. If my family had behaved differently, there'd be nothing to talk about. Your brother? She asked quietly. Your father? Are they abusers in your eyes? That's an emotionally manipulative question, he said, the words sharp. You're trying to get a headline. I'm trying, Emily answered, voice still steady, to understand how far your anger goes. You've described physical altercations, shouting matches, icy silences. Some viewers will look at this and wonder, have you perhaps become the thing you say you're fighting? Someone who can't let go? Something flashed across his face, annoyance, maybe even a flicker of doubt, but it vanished almost immediately, replaced by a cool, practiced stare. Let me be very clear, he said, enunciating each word. I didn't start this war, but I'm not going to apologize for refusing to lose it quietly. Emily allowed that line to hang in the air for a moment, then scribbled something on her notepad. In this interview, she said, you've used the word war twice already. War with the press, war with the institution, war for your narrative. Do you worry at all that ordinary people struggling with energy bills, with the NHS, with cost of living, might find this theatrical, a privileged feud between a prince and his palace? Harry exhaled sharply through his nose. That's the classic deflection, he said. Whenever someone from a marginalized position speaks up, suddenly we're told there are real problems, as if multiple issues can't exist at once. Do you, Emily asked softly, see yourself as marginalized? He hesitated, just for a heartbeat, then lifted his chin. In some ways, yes, he said. In my own family, certainly. I married someone the institution wasn't ready for. We were punished for it. And yet, she replied, you are still a prince. You still live in a multi-million-dollar home in Montecito. You still monetize your title, whether you admit it or not. Is that really marginalization, or is it rebranding? For the first time, color rose visibly in Harry's cheeks. This is exactly what I expected, he said coldly. I come here to talk about the projects we're doing, mental health work, veteran support, and instead, you play semantics with my life. If that makes good television, congratulations. We will talk about your projects, Emily said evenly. But people can look those up in a press release. What they rarely see is you under real scrutiny. So, yes, this is television. It's also journalism. His eyes narrowed. You sound very proud of that. I am, she replied. There was another small silence. On the studio monitors, the two figures looked like pieces on a chessboard. One relentless, one increasingly agitated. Emily glanced at her notes again, then looked up. Let's end this section on something simple, she said. If your father were watching tonight, and he switched off midway through this interview, what line do you most hope he heard? Harry stared at her, clearly unprepared for that. The seconds ticked by. Finally he said, that I won't be silent just to make him comfortable. Emily nodded once. And what line, she added quietly, Do you most fear he hears? A tiny muscle jumped in his jaw. He didn't answer. More from Prince Harry, Emily said, turning to the camera. After the break, where we'll ask whether his new life in California is really as free as he claims, and what happens when a man who walked away from the palace discovers that public opinion can walk away from him too. The lights dimmed. In the control room, the director exhaled and muttered, "That's only the first block." Nobody dared look away from the screens. The studio lights surged back to full intensity. Harry sat upright now, shoulders squared. Whatever hesitation flickered earlier was gone, replaced by a controlled defiance. Emily met his gaze without blinking. The war, if it wasn't already declared, had now entered open combat. Before the break, Emily began calmly, I asked what you most feared your father might hear tonight. You chose not to answer. So, let's change direction. She glanced briefly at her notes. You've said that moving to California gave you freedom, that for the first time in your life, you could live without constant institutional control. I want to understand what you mean by freedom, because from the outside, your life now appears more commercial, more managed, and more exposed than ever. Harry let out a short, incredulous laugh. That's a very British framing of freedom, he said, as if freedom only exists when someone else approves of how you live it. Is it freedom? Emily countered. If your every move is still mediated through contracts, publicists, streaming platforms, and lawyers? Of course it is, Harry snapped. Because we choose those relationships. The palace didn't give me a choice. Netflix didn't force me to be born a spare. Emily did not interrupt. She waited just long enough for the remark to echo uncomfortably in the room. You refer often to being the spare, she said quietly. In your book, in interviews, in your campaigning, some psychologists have observed that this fixation suggests unresolved identity conflict. Do you agree? Harry's eyes flashed. That's psychoanalysis through a television screen. It's irresponsible. I'm quoting experts, Emily replied. Experts who say identity trauma doesn't always resolve simply by changing geography. And I'm telling you, he shot back, that distance saved my life, mentally, possibly physically. From what? She asked softly. Your family? Or from the role they represent? From the machine, he said. The expectations, the silence, the hypocrisy. Emily leaned forward slightly. And yet, the machine you criticize is also the source of your global platform, your influence, your revenue streams. If you had been born simply Harry Windsor, with no title, no royal connection at all, would Hollywood have signed you to those deals? The question landed precisely where it was meant to. Harry's lips pressed into a thin line. So now my birth disqualifies my suffering? No, Emily said, but it does complicate your claim of being trapped without benefit. He shifted in his chair. People love to talk about the benefits. They rarely mention the cost. Then let's list them, she replied. Cost. You lost public military duties. You lost Frogmore Cottage. You lost proximity to your family. But you gained financial independence, total narrative control, and extraordinary visibility. Is that an unfair summary? It's a hollow summary, Harry said flatly. You cannot put total narrative control in the same sentence as British tabloids. But you are controlling it now, Emily pressed. Books, films, interviews, all curated by you. For the first time, he answered sharply. She nodded. Which brings me to Meghan. His posture changed instantly. The defensive shield came up. You've both said that one of the key reasons for leaving the UK was press hostility toward your wife. Racism, intrusion, intimidation. Yet since leaving, you've increased your exposure dramatically. High-profile appearances, global media tours. How do you reconcile those two things? We control the environment now, he said. That's the difference. And when Meghan appears in a sit-down interview with an American host, Emily replied, answering deeply personal questions, it's controlled. But when British journalists investigate claims you've both made about the royal family, that's harassment? Harry's voice sharpened. British journalists didn't investigate, they attacked. Some would argue, Emily said evenly, that journalists investigated inconsistencies, dates, timelines, wording. Inconsistencies exist when trauma is retold, he interrupted. Anyone who's been through it knows that. Then, let's talk about one very specific. Inconsistency, Emily replied calmly. She lifted a page from her notes. In one interview, your wife said discussions about your child's skin tone occurred before your son was born. Later, you clarified that the conversation happened earlier in your relationship. Can you explain the difference? Harry froze for a fraction of a second. That was deliberately distorted, he said, by the press. I'm quoting your own words, Emily replied. The nuance was destroyed, he insisted, for shock value. You don't think the nuance matters? She asked, when the claim was one of the most explosive racial allegations ever made against the royal family. Harry leaned forward, his tone hardening. The fact you're still questioning the validity of that experience says more about this institution than it does about me. I'm questioning the timeline, Emily said quietly, not the pain. They're inseparable, he snapped. Journalism sometimes requires separating them, she replied, because one shapes public outrage, the other shapes public trust. He shook his head. You see, this is exactly why nothing ever changes. You retreat into definitions while real people suffer. And yet, she countered, definitions are what turn claims into evidence. Now the frustration was unmistakable. Harry's foot bounced subtly against the carpet. Let me ask you something, Emily, he said, changing tactics. Has your family ever been chased through a tunnel by flashing bulbs? Has your mother died because photographers wouldn't stop? Emily's face remained composed. No, she replied, but many families have lost loved ones without global titles attached. Grief is not a competition, Prince Harry. His eyes darkened. It becomes a competition when people use it to delegitimize your choices. And it becomes politics, she said softly, when you use it to justify everything you've done since. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. She pressed on. You've accused the royal family of emotional neglect. You've accused the British media of racism. You've accused palace staff of sabotage. Is there any institution left in your story that doesn't serve as an antagonist? The one I'm building, he said curtly. With Netflix, with charities, with veteran foundations, with youth mental health initiatives. Funded how? She asked. Through the commercial work you keep framing as morally suspect, he replied sharply. Moral questions arise, Emily said, when advocacy becomes indistinguishable from branding. That's cynical, he shot back. Or realistic, she replied. The temperature in the room continued to rise, invisible but suffocating. Emily shifted slightly in her chair. Let me ask one final question in this segment. She paused, choosing her words with care. Do you believe that anything you've done since leaving Britain has improved relations with your family? Harry exhaled slowly. No, he said. But I don't measure my life by their comfort anymore. And if the result, Emily said, is permanent estrangement, no reconciliation, no return, not as a royal, not as a son. He stared at the floor for a moment. Then that's the price of truth. She regarded him quietly. Some would call that a very high price for a narrative that will always be contested. He looked back up, defiance returning. Truth always is? Emily turned slightly toward the camera. When we return, she said, we'll explore the part of Prince Harry's life that remains almost entirely private, his children, and whether his fight with the monarchy has unintentionally created exactly the kind of exposure he once vowed to escape. The camera lights dimmed again. In the control room, a producer whispered, "He's cornered now." Harry adjusted his cuffs silently as the break rolled. The studio lights rose again, brighter this time, colder somehow. The room felt smaller, tighter. Harry sat with his hands clasped, jaw set. Emily rested her notes on her lap, but did not look at them immediately. For the first time that evening, she studied him in silence, as if deciding exactly how deep she was about to cut. Before the break, she began gently, "We spoke about truth, narrative, and consequence. I'd like now to talk about the part of your life you protect most fiercely, your children." Harry stiffened instantly. "They are off limits," he said. Emily nodded once. "I'm not asking for names, details, or images. I'm asking about choices." He did not respond. You've said repeatedly that you left Britain to protect them from intrusion, she continued. Yet your children now live in a country with a far more aggressive celebrity economy. Paparazzi culture is not smaller in California. It is industrial. How do you reconcile that? We control access, Harry said sharply. That's the difference. Do you? Emily asked softly. Because your children's existence is now central to a global brand. Streaming documentaries, books, carefully staged photographs, carefully timed releases. They are hidden and yet omnipresent. They are not products, he snapped. No, Emily agreed, but they are part of a story that generates revenue. Harry leaned forward. You're implying exploitation? That's disgraceful. I'm implying contradiction, she replied evenly. You accuse the palace of using you as an asset, but you have now built a commercial structure where your identity as a royal exile is the primary commodity. My children are not that identity, but they are affected by it, Emily said. Silence followed, heavy, pressurized. You've written, she continued, that one of your deepest fears is that history will repeat itself, that your children might one day resent you for the life they inherited. Harry swallowed. Every parent fears that. Then let me ask plainly, she said. Do you believe your children will grow up knowing Britain as their home, or only as the villain in your story? His eyes lifted, sharp. They will grow up knowing the truth. Whose truth? She asked. He hesitated. Their truth, he said, though with less certainty than before. Emily leaned back slightly. Your son is an American citizen. He will be educated outside the British system, outside royal tradition. Is it fair to say he may never fully understand the institution you've dedicated your life to opposing? Good, Harry said. That's the point. But if he never understands it, she countered, how can he ever judge it independently? Harry frowned. He doesn't need to judge it. He needs to be free from it. Emily's tone sharpened, subtly. Freedom from context can also be freedom from comprehension. You're turning philosophy into accusation, he replied. No, she said. I'm turning consequence into responsibility. He leaned back, frustrated. You keep framing everything I do as contradictory, but life after trauma is contradictory. Yet you speak in absolutes, she said. Villains and victims, liberation and captivity. There is rarely any middle ground. Because the middle ground failed us, Harry shot back. The middle ground is how silence thrives. Emily lowered her voice. Or how reconciliation survives. The word hung between them. Do you want reconciliation? She asked quietly. Harry's jaw tightened. He looked away for the first time that evening. I want accountability. For whom? For everyone who enabled what happened. Even when that accountability costs your children a relationship with their grandparents' cousins' homeland. They'll survive without castles, he said coldly. But will they survive without roots? Emily pressed. Now irritation broke fully through his restraint. You keep romanticizing the institution that nearly destroyed my marriage. And you, she replied, continue simplifying a system of thousands into a single villain because complexity doesn't serve your narrative. That's insulting, he snapped. It's probing, she replied. A faint shift could be felt behind the cameras. Technicians exchanged glances. This was no longer a difficult interview. It was becoming a showdown. You speak constantly about generational trauma, Emily continued, about cycles of pain. Do you ever worry you may be creating a new one, just in a different country? Harry laughed bitterly. So, now I'm the abuser. I didn't say that. You're implying it. I'm questioning power, she said. Parental, narrative, financial. The same powers you accuse others of misusing. He pointed slightly, a rare gesture. You speak as though neutrality exists in grief. It doesn't. Nor does immunity, she replied. The tension was now electric. Harry's breathing had changed, shorter, sharper. Let me ask one final question about your children, Emily said, her voice steady but firm. When they are old enough to read your book, your version of events, will they also have access to the versions that contradict you? Harry stared at her. They'll see the lies for what they are. And if they don't? She asked. A long pause. Then I've failed them, he said quietly. The admission was sudden, unplanned. Emily seized the moment. "Failure," she said, "is not leaving the institution. Failure would be denying your children the full complexity of their inheritance, both the good and the bad." Harry looked unsettled now. The composure that had shielded him earlier was thinning. "I will not let the monarchy define my children," he said firmly. "No," Emily replied, "but you are defining it for them." He opened his mouth to argue. "Let me move to one last area," she continued before he could. "Your future." He narrowed his eyes. "My future? You have cut ties with your country in all but sentiment. You have commercial commitments, political positioning, and a global audience. Do you intend to remain a campaigning figure, or do you ever plan to withdraw from public conflict?" "I don't retreat," he said. "Even when conflict becomes identity?" she asked. "I am not defined by conflict." "Tonight," she replied, "almost everything you've said has been framed against an enemy." His lips tightened. "Because the enemy hasn't disappeared." Emily leaned in fully now. "And what happens," she asked, "when the enemy finally does disappear? When the palace grows quiet? When public interest fades? When outrage no longer sustains a platform?" Harry frowned. He did not answer. "Who is Prince Harry?" she asked softly. "When there is no institution left to resist?" The question landed deeper than any before. He shifted in his chair. The silence stretched. Then, abruptly, he said, "You're trying to dismantle me." "I'm asking who you are without the war," she replied. His voice hardened. "This interview has turned hostile." Emily met his gaze. "No, it has turned honest." For the first time, the authority in the room shifted. Harry was no longer steering the narrative. He was reacting to it. "And when we return," Emily said calmly, turning toward the camera, "we will address the question that now defines this conversation. Whether Prince Harry is still fighting the monarchy, or whether he is now fighting the consequences of having left it." The lights dimmed for the last time that night. Harry sat in rigid silence as the break began. The producer in the control room whispered, "He's unraveling." The studio returned from break in dead silence. No soft music, no easing back in. Emily did not smile. "Prince Harry," she said calmly, "you've spoken tonight about truth, accountability, family, trauma, and power. But every question that challenges your narrative, you've treated as a personal attack." Harry folded his arms. "Because that's exactly what this has been." "No," Emily replied steadily. "This has been an interview, one you agreed to." "You've twisted every answer," he shot back. "You've tried to trap me in contradictions that only exist in your framing." "The contradictions exist in your words," she said. "Not mine." Harry shook his head in disbelief. "This is why I left. This exact tone, this exact manipulation dressed up as journalism." Emily leaned forward slightly. "Then let me be absolutely clear. Journalism does not exist to protect you from discomfort. It exists to test power, and tonight you have resisted every test." His voice rose. "Because your test is biased. And your resistance," she replied, just as calmly, "has become avoidance." The tension snapped. Harry pushed back in his chair. "I will not sit here and be dismantled for your ratings." Emily's expression hardened for the first time. "This program is not a stage for grievance theater." The air froze. "You were invited here for dialogue," she continued, "not for lectures, not for accusations, and certainly not for contempt." Harry stood abruptly. "Then I'm done." Emily did not raise her voice. "Prince Harry," she said firmly, "if you cannot engage without hostility, then this interview cannot continue." He stared at her. "Are you asking me to leave?" he demanded. "Yes," Emily said without hesitation. "I am." A collective gasp rippled through the studio. "This program will not proceed in this tone," she added. "You may leave." For a moment, Harry looked stunned, then furious. He removed his microphone with a sharp motion, placed it on the small table, and said coldly, "History will judge this." Emily